the issue of curriculum. Is curriculum preparing students for what parts of their lives? For employment, a larger vision of life, that kind of thing? Are students graduating? You know that there is a great deal of controversy around the issue of the dropout rate. And the third issue, which I think is really the most important one, is the one that Richard is focused on, which is what are the learning outcomes and how can programs be structured for the greatest student learning outcomes. So it's a great privilege to hear from Professor Arum this afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much for that gracious introduction. So I'm very excited to present today the first time on this new measurement project that we're undertaking at UCI. So just to give you a little outline of what we're going to cover today, first I want to spend a few minutes talking about the motivations for the project, building the state-of-the-art measurement system to track undergraduate student experiences and outcomes. Second, I want to then unpack that measurement system and we think about it, the work in three strands: the administrative data, the LMS, the learning management systems data, Canvas or Blackboard. I'm not sure what's being used here at Berkeley. We use Canvas primarily at UCI. And then performance assessments, some new performance assessments, surveys. I don't need that. Surveys and experiential sampling methods. Most of the presentation will be on the strand C. We're still, the learning management systems data, we've had the greatest challenges technically to make sense of that data. We're making lots of progress on that, but presentation's probably 3-4 months off. But I'll tell you what we're planning to do with that data, and you'll get some of the administrative data as well. And so then I'm going to share with you some sample items and descriptive data on academic, social, psychological, and civic measures from the project, basically to illustrate for you what the capacity is of this new measurement system. So it's not a formal presentation in terms of, you know, here are the findings that are that I've done multivariate analysis on to talk about the significance of one factor or another in terms of driving different student outcomes. Instead, we're at an earlier stage of the project where we've just got the data from the fall semester. We now have some descriptive data to share with you to give you a sense of kind of how we're going to be moving the field ahead in terms of more sophisticated measurement. And then finally, I'll conclude with next steps for the project and our plans for, in particular, disseminating our measurement system to other institutions. So starting off with motivations for the project as a whole, I think it's a good place to start is to acknowledge the challenges higher education is facing today. Significant challenges. First, the U.S. is falling behind other countries in the production of new college graduates. The U.S., of course, led the world after World War II for decades in producing not just the number of graduates, but the percentage of its population that was graduated with a college degree. Neither of those things are true any longer. In fact, many of the East Asian societies are producing many more college graduates in terms of percentage, as well as in terms of actual numbers, than the U.S. is. And European countries are also now beginning to surpass the U.S. as well. The rate of growth of higher education stagnated in the 80s and 90s and has just begun to kind of creep up again, but at nowhere near the pace that we're seeing in terms of expansion in other institutions. Why? Well, part of it is the US higher education system is incredibly expensive. We deliver higher education at about twice the cost per student of college education in Europe. Why is it so expensive? Well, we provide a very particular version of what a college experience should look like. For one thing, in the US, students don't just go to college, they go away to college. They move from their homes to colleges and live on campus or around campus in extraordinarily high numbers. That is a very expensive model to provide to students because not only are you providing the full cost of supporting students as they attend their living expenses, but you also have to start getting in the business of providing student support services to attend to psychological and mental health issues that many people in our society, including young people, are facing at high numbers. Oh, thank you. Okay. So it's a very expensive model to run. Third, our institutions are, there are lots of structural problems in what we're delivering to students. It's a very expensive model, but there are also a couple of places where there's widespread agreement today about the structural problems in terms of student outcomes. For one, we have a huge dropout rate of students that start college and university in the US. Somewhere between 40 and 50% of students that start college don't finish. They don't finish in 6 years, they don't finish ever. Imagine if our high schools had a dropout rate of 40 or 50%, how they would, we would condemn them. But somehow we accept that rate, even though our students are more selected for academic success than high school students, and yet we accept that as kind of a taken for granted, matter of fact outcome in colleges and universities. There's also increasing recognition that students' learning outcomes in colleges and universities are less than optimal. If you don't believe in differences in pre and post-test gains on many measures, there's an increasing body of work on that. All you have to do is look at what students report in terms of their academic engagement, which has dropped in half from prior decades where typical college students today say instead of studying 25 hours per week, they're studying 12 and a half hours per week. The academic engagement, the academic commitment has dropped in half. And so, again, lots of evidence around that challenge and failure as well. These institutional failures, because when they're at that magnitude of students affected, you can't blame the students. The institutions have to take responsibility for some of the outcomes. They disproportionately affect students from underrepresented minority backgrounds. And so if you're interested in equity and social justice, this is of great concern, has to be of great concern to you. And if you're not interested in equity and social justice and you're just worried about the production of college students in general, well, you can't we can't produce enough college students without providing college education for everyone. And so we have to address the social justice equity issues in order to achieve the national outcomes and goals we're aspiring to. The last point, I think, is to me, something that we should all be keeping top of mind. And I'm giving this talk during Super Tuesday. We should really keep in top of mind the fact that the public sentiment towards higher education public support is dramatically declining. If you look at public opinion surveys, first of all, Republicans, the majority of Republicans today say higher education is part of the problem in our country today. It's contributing to the problems in our country, not the solutions. The majority of Republicans. And the majority of Democrats say higher education needs to be fixed. When you dig deeper into public opinions about what are the actual problems, the three things that come up often are lack of confidence in higher education management, questioning the value of college, and also questioning the quality of college education. These kind of fundamental questions, I think we need to keep top in mind, because without the political support of the country, public higher education, it will be impossible to sustain. So this threat to the long-term sustainability of higher education, again, we need to keep top of mind. Well, where does this problem come from? A lack of faith, the confidence in management, questioning of the value, and questions about quality. Well, I would say some of it comes from this thing right here, this paradox, if you will, that higher education has for decades talked about the importance of evidence-based, data-driven improvements in organizations. We have programs providing graduate degrees in nonprofit administration, government, public administration, business schools that all teach the same thing. You have to, in a modern organization, in order to be effective, you have to use data to inform decision making. So we've been promoting this for many decades. The paradox, of course, is we are an incredible laggard at actually doing this ourselves. That is, taking seriously that we should be collecting data on our students, our clients, or if you want to adopt a consumer logic, our customers, but that we should be collecting data on them to better serve them. I honestly cannot think of another organization in modern society that does this as poorly as higher education. If you look on your phone, you know, all the apps you have, Amazon, Netflix, whatever you have, they're all using sophisticated algorithms to make sense of how you're using that information to improve their products and to better serve you as individuals. The extent to which that's done in higher education is really at its infancy at best. You see some examples, predictive analytical reporting, so on. There are some examples, but it's really, we are so far behind what is possible today and the rest of society. And we're particularly far behind today because there's been incredible technological advancements in how education is delivered, how it can be measured, and how it can be assessed to improve educational outcomes. So we have the technical ability now to do this very easily, but we haven't, we don't have the institutional will, the political will to be doing this systematically in the higher education system. But again, if we did, perhaps we could design systems more intentionally to get the outcomes we wanted in terms of graduation, student learning. Perhaps we could address some of the challenges around social justice and equity that the disproportionate patterns we're seeing. And perhaps we could regain the confidence of the public that, in fact, the management of higher education was focused very keenly on student outcomes and using data-driven approaches to ensure that those outcomes were at a very high level. So these overall considerations came together at UCI because at UCI we had kind of we're uniquely positioned in the field to be able to stand up a project of this character. First of all, UCI is really distinct in terms of being a major research university that serves such a diverse student body. 85% of the undergraduates at UCI are non-white, and 50% are first generation. And that incredibly diverse student body, which is the future of American higher education, is coupled with a major research university. And a major research university that's built a School of Education in the last 7 years. The School of Education is only 7 years old there, that has pulled together some of the leading social, behavioral, and institutional improvement scientists in the country to do this work. So we have a depth of faculty expertise that can be brought to bear on this project that, frankly, you don't have in many places. And I'll show you the people involved shortly. And then the other thing you have at UCI, which you don't have in many places, is you have the entire institution from top to bottom 100% on board, because it's a major research university, 100% on board a project that's improving measurement to do data-driven improvement of institutional performance. So the chancellor, the project you'll see, the chancellor wrote the letter to the students recruiting them onto the project. The provost is totally supportive. The co-PI of the project is the dean of undergraduate education and the vice provost of teaching and learning. And the students themselves are supportive. The student senate at UCI actually formally endorsed the project because they understand the importance of this project for improving the delivery of institutional services on campus. And again, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find lots of colleges and universities with a diverse student body that looks like America, that has has a lot of this particular expertise and the widespread buy-in for this kind of work. The goals of the project are as follows. One, to develop new measures of undergraduate experiences and outcomes. Frankly, the measures we have today are so rudimentary and limited that we can't help to, we're unable to capture the depth and the complexity of what higher education institutions are trying to accomplish with their students. And so if all we have at the end of the day to look at are labor market outcomes, again, it's going to be insufficient to capture the type of educational experiences and goals of many of our students, as well as the educators that are working hard to educate them. We need more sophisticated measures if we hope to capture what higher education institutions are all about. Second, Our measurement is designed to improve institutional performance and to advance educational equity. And then the third thing I want to say is we want to promote deeper understanding of educational processes and clearer identification of value of these educational investments. And I want to, in particular, talk about value, not just in general, but the project was funded by, originally by the Mellon Foundation that has had a deep interest in the value of the liberal arts. The Mellon Foundation for decades has invested in humanities, the humanities on campus, and liberal arts institutions. Enrollments in humanities majors are in steep decline. Enrollments in liberal arts colleges, once you get below the elite level, are also in steep decline. Many of those institutions are potentially closing. And so the foundation wanted to identify the value of the liberal arts, but knew that they couldn't do that really unless they developed new measures that would capture the complexity. And so the measures, some of the measures you're going to see are attuned to the liberal arts educational value in particular, but the liberal arts education value broadly defined. And defined in a way that's closely aligned with, I think, the needs of 21st century workforce. The competencies that we're going to be measuring are aligned with the liberal arts education, but also kind of 21st century needs for the economy and society. Get you more to that shortly. The research design for the project is as follows. We're going to show you data on 1,248 undergraduate students. They're made up of freshmen, continuing juniors, and transferred juniors. As you know, in the UC system, for every 2 freshmen that come in, 1 transfer student comes in. And so we'll be capturing students at entry as well as a comparison group of continuing juniors. And we can look at differences between freshmen and juniors to see, are there potential changes over time. We want to eventually be able to not just look at these kind of differences, freshmen versus juniors, controlling for factors and so on, but a better research design is to follow the students over time to see how they change as they experience education. So our initial funding is for 2 years, so we have freshmen going to their sophomore year, juniors going to their senior year, but the intent of the project is to go from follow the freshmen to graduation, follow the juniors 2 years out into the labor market. This year, we ended up with a convenience sample. We learned that if you send out students, even if the note comes from the chancellor over the summer, large numbers of students don't open their email. This is true for all students, but also for students coming into the institution for the first time. So we had challenges communicating with them to recruit our random sample. So what we did was we opened it up to all freshmen and juniors, and so it's a convenience sample for this first project where we're developing the measure. So keep that in mind in terms of potential bias and so on. I'll show you how it looks. Our sample looks similar and different from the population of freshmen and juniors. Our intention is to add a new cohort of students next year and to go back to our intentions of random sampling. The participants in the project, the full sample of 1,200 students, when they start the year with a set of performance assessments and a large survey, they're given $50 to complete that, and to complete surveys at the end of each quarter and at the end of the year. there's a subsample of a third of those students, so we did in-depth analyses of weekly survey data collection and experiential sampling. And those students received an independent study credit for each quarter that they're in the project. The data, of course, is identified, research methods are reviewed and approved by UCI subject. So the leads on the project are, and the data strands are as follows. I mentioned the first one is taking the administrative data and the data from the Student Affairs Office. Rachel Baker, one of our assistant professors and economist of education, is managing that strand. Strand 2 is making sense of the learning management systems data. We have Mark Warschauer, just elected into the National Academy of Education Fellows. That announcement just went out last week. He's one of the leading experts on online and ed technology. He's managing that strand. And then strand 3, the performance assessment surveys and experiential sampling. I have the good fortune to be working with Jackie Eccles on that. Jackie Eccles is probably the leading international psychologist of education with expertise on student motivation. And so we're very fortunate that she was designing the surveys and advising on the assessments that we built out with ETS. A larger group of the faculty here, you can see there's about 10 faculty that are engaged on the project. Here at UCI, some affiliated faculty. Peter Bierman is working at Columbia University, coding, machine reading the syllabi that we're collecting. Kristen Fischer and Julia Muller are working on the project from Germany. Julia is an expert on experiential sampling. Postdoc grad student researchers, data warehouse lab manager, and undergrad researchers. Again, it's funded by the Mellon Foundation, and I'm very proud to say it was endorsed by the Student Senate. Okay, strand 1 of the project, the administrative data strand. What we have access to is all the student admission records, so we can control for prior background and in the study. And then the college records, the academic standing, the course taking patterns, membership in special programs. What we're trying to do also, though, is to develop new measures of course level peer composition. So as a sociologist, we've known for decades that one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, school effect are peers. And people don't go into a college and university, they go into particular courses and programs that might look very different from courses and programs elsewhere on campus. And so I think it's essential to kind of understand, in order to understand student experience, to understand who are students interacting with and sitting with in their classrooms, and again, to get a better understanding. And so we're looking at it at kind of the individual level, but also being able to kind of characterize what the peer composition is of students in different classes. The learning management systems data, this has become an incredibly rich set of data for researchers to consider. And so what we're planning to do here is to develop new measures of academic engagement, including conscientiousness, pacing, peer and faculty interaction. And so you can observe whether or not, whether and how students are interacting with the information in these learning management systems. Do they wait till the day before it's due? Do they wait till the week before the final? Do they look consistently at it, the kind of the pacing thing? Are there interactions between the peer and the faculty? What are the character of the interactions there? And you also have the student writing, the actual writing that they're doing throughout their college and university that we can make access of to have an authentic way of looking at changes in students' writing.
Can I ask a
Igor.
short question? Do you look at LMS data and administrative data for the general population or for a sample?
Yeah, so very good question. So on the administrative and learning management systems data, you, in order to make sense of the individual students, you need the data of other students in the class as background context. And so, yes, we're looking at the information of the other students in the class, but we're not linking that data to their outcomes. We're looking at that data contextual to make sense. So, in terms of conscientiousness, you'd want to be able to look at kind of what are students doing relative to other students in the class to make sense of it, if that makes sense. Yeah, but again, then the analysis is only on our students who formally consented to the project. We have IRB approval to look at the other information de-identified as background context for the students. Okay, getting a little far into the weeds, but that's good. Strand 3, this is the one that Jackie Eccles and I are heading up, and again, most of the presentation is going to be on this, but so they take some performance tests and the core survey as they enter college in fall 2019, or they come back as continuing juniors. There's end of term surveys that they do, so at the end of each term we ask about the classes that they've taken, what instruction occurred, and their behavior and goals. Then we'll do repeated testing at the end of spring, 18 months later, and give the core survey as well. The core survey covers things like college expectations, core choices, educational, occupational aspirations, political affiliation. It's a 45-minute survey. It's quite extensive. I want to talk a little bit about the performance assessments here, and in particular, I'm going to give you show you in detail just one of them to kind of illustrate kind of some of the cutting-edge, interesting stuff we're doing. So our performance assessments, we took one off-the-shelf assessment, the critical thinking assessment. ETS is used out in the field. It's called Heighten. We've used that one. But the next three we developed in partnership with ETS as new measures that potentially could capture the value of education, aligned with the liberal arts education, but also aligned with 21st century economic and social needs. So the three new ones we developed was collaborative problem solving. Everyone talks about that being an essential 21st century skill. We actually have come up with a measure of measuring students' ability to collaboratively problem solve. So I'll show you that instrument in a second. Confirmation bias. Here we assess, can you change your mind once you have an original conception of an idea? Can you be presented with new information to change your mind? Or are you fixed once you've made up your mind? No new information is going to change it. Well, we can assess that. And then the third one we think is really important is perspective taking. You're given a scenario of diverse social actors, and you're asked, can you understand how the different actors in this scenario might think about the situation? Can you take the perspective of someone other than yourself, someone different from you? So again, we try to assess that also. We think all these things are tied to traditional notions of liberal arts education and also are essential for 21st century economic, social, political well-being. In addition, we took an assessment from Sam Weinberg at Stanford on civic online reasoning. If you're given a set of artifacts from the internet, are you able to understand the reliability and validity of those artifacts, of something you might encounter on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram? Can you make sense of that? So we assessed that with an instrument that Sam Weinberg developed. But again, I don't have time to go into all those in detail, but I'll show you the collaborative problem-solving one because it's really, I think it's really cool. It's interesting. So the students are put into groups online, randomly assigned to groups of 4, and they're given a problem to solve that involves ranking of candidates or apartments, and they're given information to consider, and they rank the different apartments. There's three choices there. So they provide the rank, and then they have a text box chat where they can interact with their peers online. So they're asked to rank these originally, then they interact, and then they're asked to rank them again. What you get to observe is what their rankings are initially, and then what their rankings are after they've interacted with each other and shared information with each other. Everyone has a set of documents and information, but some of the information the other individuals don't have access to. So to solve the problem successfully, as a group, you have to share information. You have to be able to actually do the collaborative problem solving, and so you're able to measure people's original opinion, whether or not they change and consider the new information. You're also able to measure the interactions that occur, right? The patterns of interactions. You're able to measure the content. This is just simply a wordle of, look what. These are 18-year-olds. Not surprising some of the words that come out. Oh yeah, LOL. So this is just a fun thing to show you, but in fact we're coding the content of it in terms of kind of what role different individuals play. Are they leaders? Are they passive? Are they followers? Are they what types of questions they ask and so on. So you're able, again, not just to talk about collaborative problem solving, but measure collaborative problem solving in terms of the actual choices that individuals make and the actual process itself you're able to measure. And we're going to measure it when they start and after 2 years and 4 years at the institution, and see whether or not you move on that. And maybe at UCI we do a lot of active learning, encouraging students to work in group projects and solve problems together. Maybe students that do more of that, you'd see more growth on this collaborative problem solving measure. Okay, I mentioned this subsample that has this more intensive measurement. Here we have weekly surveys on, every Sunday they take a 20-minute survey that asks them about their experiences. Each week we vary what we're asking about. Sometimes we repeat it so we can get measures of stress throughout at different points. Sometimes we do a deep dive on particular topics. So we have everything about learning behavior, academic activities, non-academic activities, detailed questions about social networks, social belonging, and mental health and stress, and discrimination and experiences of microaggression. We also are piloting in this spring now some experiential sampling. These are administered on smartphones. Each student will get 50 2 to 3 minute surveys at random times, and they're asked questions about where are they, what are they doing, with whom are you with, how are you feeling? Looks something like that. You get buzzed on your phone, and we'll actually have a sense of what students, where they are on campus, what they're doing, who they're interacting with, and how they're experiencing it. So if they say, I'm in class, how are you feeling? I'm bored. That's telling, right? And so again, we'll have a very rich sense of what our students are experiencing. Okay, now I want to spend just a few minutes showing you a little bit about the data. Again, not with kind of hard-hitting empirical findings, but just give you a sense of kind of what interesting stuff this is revealing. First, though, our weighted study sample. I'm weighting here just so we can compare it to the freshman and junior population at UCI. After we do this exercise, I'm not going to weight it anymore. And so you see we have, like many college studies, it's overrepresented. Women, male students are less willing to comply and participate in studies in higher education. Here we see that our first gen and non-first gen participation roughly comparable to UCI. Again, where half of our a little bit more than half of our students are first generation. Here's by race and ethnicity and international student status. Calling out here, we're undercounted in terms of international students. 19% of UCI is international, only 8% are in our study, for reasons you can imagine. And we're slightly overrepresented in our Hispanic Latino sample. Okay, and here you see the rate of white non-Hispanic students at UCI. Here's by we cluster schools together, biology and the health sciences in one, other STEM fields here, social and applied social science. The applied social sciences include business and education. We consider those applied social sciences for this exercise. Humanities and arts, and then students that are undeclared. Again, we have a slight overrepresentation here in biology and health science. Again, those are majors where female students are concentrated, and we mentioned that bias before. Okay, now let's show some of the interesting findings. Well, so the students come in. You might ask, do they have friends already at campus there, right? Is that transition going to be more difficult because they don't know anyone on campus? And here, the first one is kind of a little bit of a surprise when you first see it, but then you think about it and it makes sense. The students that have the lowest portion of friends coming in are actually the white students, because there's only 15% of the campus undergraduates are white. And so they come in with fewer friends, and it's the non-first generation students that come in with fewer friends than the first generation students. I think any other campus, if you did the same study at Berkeley, you'd find very different patterns, but this is particular to UCI. But again, I think it's interesting because I don't think as educators there, we've thought about those challenges in quite those ways before. Incoming friends, the humanities and arts, the most isolated. Again, I think it has a lot to do with the demographics of students there. Turning to mental health, distress, and social support, we have relatively high rates of mental health distress on campus at UCI, like in the rest of higher education. You see that these rates are particularly high for first generation students, and particularly for students that aren't connected to a program in a school. We use the Kessler K10 screening instrument for this measure. Then we have this very interesting finding where we asked about where do you get support and help for problems you're facing on campus. We asked them in week 2 and week 6, and we asked, I'm showing the responses for faculty and peer. What's very interesting here is that in the STEM fields, the faculty, getting help and support from faculty, we see a steep decline from the beginning to the week 6, and you see how the week 6 it's lower than all the other schools other than the undeclared. And so again, there's a sense of to what extent are faculty providing support for students as they navigate these transitions. The peer supports tend to be higher than the faculty support and more consistent. Reported stress, and so here we look at stress in different areas. Here you could be, we asked about stress in academics, relationships, practical matters, health, discrimination, sexual orientation, and language and cultural issues. And we find here, again, I'm just doing a really quick, just to give you a sense of what the data can generate. We see, again, the STEM, the non-biology and health STEM fields. We see higher rates of discrimination and stress around discrimination and sexual orientation than in other units. And so you're able to say, oh, okay, we can work on those programs to improve and address those challenges students are facing there. You also see the stress in terms of first generation, non-first generation, roughly comparable across the board, with the exception of these practical stress issues that first generation students are experiencing. So again, other people have written about this in the field, first generation students facing stress from managing life and the stress that their families are experiencing in our society as a whole being pronounced, whereas the other stress levels are, again, roughly comparable. We don't see differences. So I'm going to show academics, and I'll show you the civic outcomes, and then we'll wrap up. So academic ability, here, just since this is from the administrative data, the term GPA from the fall, we see that it's lowest, these undeclared majors, and the first generation students are also struggling a little bit. The critical thinking measure, we see lower initial rates there, but the freshman to junior rates increases are greatest with the first generation students. Hours each studying per week, we see, again, first gen and non-first gen, it's the non-first generation students that are not working as hard, less engaged. Class time on group work, there's been a huge push at UCI to do non-lecturing, but to get people working on active learning. So you can combine these two numbers to get a sense of the active learning rates in these different schools. So the highest the highest class time on group work is STEM, the non-bio health STEM fields, right? And then we could check, does the collaborative problem solving move up there? And the other class time not lecturing, humanities and arts. This is class time spent in class discussions or other non-lecture activities. And then I just put in this one as a placeholder. Did they, because we have a lot of questions on student advisement, on students, the role of advisors in supporting the choice of major and the choice of courses. So here, this is just a placeholder to show you, did they rely on a counselor to decide their major? And you'll see that when high rates of students in the non-biology health STEM fields, their counselors kind of suggested that they go that way. Also, counselors seem to have suggested another path. Don't declare, take your time, you don't have to. The students in that pathway also, or non-pathway also, counselors have told them it's okay not to pick a major. And then we see that the first generation students are relying on counselors and advisors more than the non-first generation. Here is different rates for freshmen, transfer juniors, and continuing juniors. So what's encouraging here is if you look at the freshmen versus the continuing juniors, you see growth that's occurred there. Again, this is not a very sophisticated analysis. We're not controlling for selective attrition or prior test scores, but you do see nevertheless some growth there. If you disaggregate for first generation and non-first generation students, the growth is highest in the first generation students are growing. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead. Oh, you also see more active learning for juniors and freshmen. Classes, one would imagine the classes are getting smaller. There's more time to interact with students in those ways. I want to show the final set of findings I want to show is on kind of civic online reasoning and civic attitudes. So here we have that civic online reasoning assessment. We see that freshmen and juniors, we see gains there. The gains are particularly pronounced again for first generation students. Here we have a political orientation of students, where 0 is conservative, 100 is liberal. Students come in slightly more liberal than conservative. If you look from freshman to junior year, there's not, I know there's concern in the public that students are coming in and they come out, they're all liberal and lefty. There's no, all the studies show the same thing. They actually don't change their political orientation in college. College is not, and so again, we don't see any evidence of that. The freshman junior snapshots here. There is increasing value of civic commitment expressed here. Environmental commitment is flat. There's increase in civic awareness. This is the keeping up, the importance of keeping up with news and public affairs. You see higher rates for juniors and freshmen. And we also asked about liberal news consumption and conservative news consumption on a weekly basis. The highest rate comes in from the transfer juniors on both liberal and conservative. They're taking in more news from both sources. But if you look at the freshmen to juniors, again, it's kind of flat. They're not. The college experience doesn't appear to be changing that in any way. What it does change is trust in news sources here. So here we ask, how much do you believe the following sources are trustworthy for the freshmen and the continuing juniors? And you can distinguish between mainstream and the mainstream press and then the more political, liberal and conservative press. And what you find here is that between the freshmen and continuing juniors, you see that continuing juniors are slightly less trustful, particularly of the more partisan sources. So the Daily Show goes down, Tucker Carlson goes down, MSNBC goes down, and Fox News goes down. So they're becoming more distrustful of more partisan information, which I think is probably good news, right? You'd want people to be more skeptical of different news sources. So the final slide is kind of what we're planning to do next. We're going to expand the survey longitudinally and with new cohorts. We're going to move from descriptive results, which I showed you today, to the multivariate analyses where we're able to kind of say things that will be useful for the field as a whole in terms of things about like advisement and other things we've discussed here. And then I'm most excited about our efforts to expand the reach of these measures so that it's not just UCI benefiting from new sophisticated measurement in higher education, but that these measures get out into the field as a whole. We're planning to do that in 3 ways. One, there's a nonprofit group called the Gardner Institute, which has been around for 2 decades. They're based in South Carolina, and they work with broad access institutions to improve first-year experience, academic advising, and gateway courses. And so they've been, over the last 2 decades, they've been in something like 400 broad access institutions, helping them improve how they serve students. We are going to partner with them so that our measures are going to be used in those institutions for their interventions to be more effective and powerful. Second, our project is part of a larger project being organized out of University of Michigan. The College and Beyond study led to the shape of the river and a whole set of research on elite institutions from 3 decades ago. We're going to be setting up a new study that's not about just the elites, but also includes broad access institutions. And the measures we're going to be using longitudinally will be based on the piloting work that we're doing here at UCI. And then finally, we're convening on June 8th and 9th at UCI a group of 24 researchers from Asia, South America, and Europe that are interested that are doing similar work in their own countries and interested in perhaps doing parallel projects. And so, again, the goal here is so that we're using these measures not just to improve work at UCI, but that these measures have provide support for other institutions that are concerned with improving student outcomes. Thank you very much for entertaining me, and for the first time I get to share out with the public the measurement work we're doing in UCI. Thanks. And are we at, how does, do I do Q&A, or are we at the end of the time?
Q&A.
Q&A, okay. So I'm happy to take some questions.
Hi, thank you for your talk, really fascinating. What are your long-term objectives? The intensity of data collection here is rather astounding. And it portends really terrific, rich data that you can learn a lot from. What are you thinking that in the long run is practical for an institution to use to continuously monitor and improve their systems?
Right, thank you very much for that question. So not every institution would have the capacity to do this. They don't all have Jackie Eccles as a colleague. So our intention is the following. One, with the Gardner work, we're going to identify from those surveys surveys that could be given perhaps 3 times, start of the quarter, mid-quarter, the end of the quarter, pare down 10-minute surveys, where if institutions could do that, those questions, we know from our larger study, are reliable and valid indicators of educational processes that we've identified. So one is kind of come up with a kind of a more more streamed down survey. The learning management system, right? Imagine in our work we're able to identify these are 5, 10 measures, let's say 5 measures that you can measure in a course about students' engagement, students' effort that that capture a lot about what the student is experiencing and engaging in. You can then go to, there's only 3 LMS providers that cover 85% of the higher ed field. And so you can go to them and say, build in these measures into your systems so that they're readily available to institutions that want to make use of them. Because again, the amount of requirements of kind of collecting that data would just be, could be too great. So we're very much thinking that what we're doing at UCI is an effort to kind of create reliable and valid data, and also to identify what pieces actually can kind of are most useful and critical in improving student outcomes.
Thanks again for your presentation. I had a question. So we're talking about student engagement in terms of like numbers of hours studying or interacting with course material. So I'm wondering if you're differentiating between what they're doing outside of those hours, meaning are they in internships, you know, are they getting hands-on real-world experience, which everyone is hearing these days, that's more important than school. You know, more important than grades is to have real-world experience. So differentiating that between, you know, just hanging out or working, right, because you have to provide for yourself and others. I'm wondering how that, like, how are you defining success in terms of engagement?
Great. No, so I was just showing you guys here like a little sliver, but you're absolutely right. We want to know about what the students are doing outside of the classroom. Internships and apprenticeships we know are very valuable for labor market transitions. So we're measuring those very concretely. We're also measuring students' involvement in clubs and the like. So we do have very fine-grained measures of that, but we'll have to do a talk just on that to show that. So those are the good questions, and we are definitely looking at those things. Zach.
Thanks for sharing these numbers. These are very interesting to see. So the data collection alone is so interesting. It could be intoxicating just to collect it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of mull over it, share it with people. A challenging next phase, I don't know if it's under Mellon or another initiative, is, you know, organizational change, right? And how does that occur? So what have you thought about in terms of the mechanism for organizational change, right? How you go from this data to improvements, and you know, what part do you see technology feeding into that versus is it really a leadership at the institution kind of approach?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to think about that work. I kind of glossed over it in the my earlier setup for the talk. One is the kind of personalization. You take the information. I talked about Amazon and Netflix. They all personalize what you're seeing. And so there's ways to use elaborate data like this to personalize instruction and advising. That's not what this is about, at least not short term. You can imagine long term, you might look at some of this information to kind of feedback on instruction and advising. But again, that's long term. Short term, the project is really focused on institutional improvement. And so there, the theory of change is right that if you share this information with faculty and administrators in these different units, and they will make sense of it and be more open and interested in changing to serve students. So UCI, we're very fortunate because we've got the chancellor, the provost, the undergrad. Like we're uniquely positioned to share this research because the entire university leadership feels ownership of it and is interested and eager to find out what we learn to improve how they can serve students. So does that answer your question a little bit? And so I also sharing here, the outcomes are kind of at the really clustered level, but we can show more fine-grained information to actors within the school to drive institutional improvements.
Very, very interesting, and I commend you for your efforts because it is a complex set of problems, and you're trying to do something that hopefully could result in change and improvements. What I wonder about is, like the point he kind of just brought up, that this does take place in the context of a campus and the politics of a campus. Yeah, I wonder how faculty feel about it, at least initially, because one could argue that they might be skeptical and feel like, yeah, that they're being monitored one way or another. And not arguing one way or the other whether that's good, but just wondering kind of how you handle the politics of eventually reporting the data and what its uses might be.
Right, right. So, one, we've been we de-identify the student data and we de-identify the faculty data. So, and we're very clear this is not about evaluation, faculty evaluation, and cannot be used for faculty evaluation. It's very clear with our IRB and with our, the project itself. I think UCI, in terms of the faculty sentiment towards the project, and in some ways I'm not the best position to provide this account, but I believe it to be true. Because UCI has gotten all these accolades in the national press, New York Times, #1 for supporting the American dream, New York Times ranking. #1 value college from Forbes or Money. There's a lot of pride at UCI from faculty that we're not just a great research university, but we're providing high quality education to undergraduate students, incredibly diverse undergraduate students. And so because of that, I think there's an openness and willingness to embrace this kind of project that's, if you will, it's UCI is uniquely positioned to be able to open their doors to this kind of work and embrace it. That doesn't answer my goal is for this effort to improve instruction throughout higher education, and there you do, okay, you can encounter faculty resistance. So I think it's important to communicate. It's not about not going to be used for faculty evaluation. Instead, it's about better serving students. And if you're clear on that, faculty care about providing, their values are aligned with that, and they'll be supportive. At least I believe that to be the case. Sir.
Thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot from the innovative measures. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how well some of these measures might travel to the K-12 world, because I see similar interests in many of the same outcomes as in undergraduate education, and I'm wondering sort of what the long-term plans might be, or if you have colleagues who might be extending the work into the K-12 realm.
Yeah. So I mean, the original intent was to work, was to address the higher ed issue. I've been working the last decade or so on higher ed because I'm really drawn to that, to responding to this real institutional need, right? That the measurement is so underdeveloped here, and so I did a project before this with 8 of the national disciplinary associations: economics, sociology, history, political science, where we identified learning outcomes and tried to get assessments built. No one wanted to build assessments because they were skeptical that there was a significant market for these assessments if they got built. But the learning outcomes are there. I could point you to those. So I've been really focused on higher ed personally. I do think these are potentially applicable to some of the high school settings. I am involved in a project with ETS that's a kind of a parallel project where we're looking at workforce development, career technical education in Orange County, and with K-12 and community college leaders and the business community, and we're talking about kind of similar sets of what are the competencies that students would need in the 21st century to be successful in the labor market and adaptable to the changing economic conditions. And they talk about the same kind of things: critical thinking, collaborative problem solving. So these, again, I think there is potential applicability into those settings as well, even though I wake up in the morning worried about higher education. Higher education has this incredible dropout rate, and again, the public sentiment is has not declined in K-12 in the same way that it is towards higher education.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit if there's any movement towards adopting this data in advisement and what the campus has planned or how it's being used.
So there's literally you are the first people, other than the researchers that produced it, that have seen this. I did share it with the leadership at UCI yesterday. This PowerPoint, I said, just so you know, I'm sharing. We're sharing this at Berkeley. You should see this. And the plan is for in the spring to have a meeting with the leaders at UCI to share it, including the Student Affairs Office, as well as the academic advising, which is under at UCI it's at the school level, but it's coordinated by the Dean of Undergraduate Education. So they're very interested and attentive to this, and I hope that we can generate things that are useful and informative to them. Down the road, I'm really interested in the role of academic advisement in students choosing particular courses and then tracking those outcomes to see whether or not those, whether when they get advice from the advisors to pick courses, the outcomes are different than. We also asked them, did you pick those courses from your peer? Did your peers advise you to take the course? Did your family? And so, but that's a more sophisticated analysis. So we're definitely, again, if you think about John Gardner's work, the places you can leverage to change student outcomes are advising, the academic advisement, the big gateway courses, and the student first year experiences in and outside the classroom. And so those are kind of places where we would start to target findings to inform institutional change.
I just wondered if you are also looking at long-term outcomes, like the jobs that students end up with when they get out and the differences between.
Yeah, so with the folks in Michigan, they're looking at graduate outcomes of the class of 2004, so they're 15 years out, and looking just not at labor market outcomes, but also surveying them about well-being, civic engagement, and so on. So a broader set of outcomes that is potentially related to kind of the value of college. So we're doing that kind of downstream work. I'm really interested in, because I'm interested in driving institutional change,
Mm-hmm.
the downstream work isn't as useful, because the labor market outcomes of students that experienced something 15 years ago, it's harder to make the case that with the changes in the labor market and the changes in that those are relevant and you're going to drive institutional change with them. So I think you want to identify more proximal measures that are the mechanisms whereby the education leads to the long-term outcomes. Because those, again, the more proximal measures, you can drive institutional change more readily with them. But you need to validate that those things you're measuring actually matter for things that people care about in the life course, like labor market outcomes, like well-being, like civic engagement, and the like.
So kind of a related question, I'm just curious, is there like an average American score on the performance test that you've done, like the critical thinking collaborative project? Like what is an average 45-year-old American score on that?
Yeah, so they would have that on the ETS Heighten one. You could look that up and
Do they?
determine that. The other ones we're designing, you know, these were in-house measures. The online civic reasoning, Sam Weinberg has a study, he has a new book out where he looks at 3 groups. They're not average Americans. The 3 groups are history PhD students, trying to remember what the third group is. History PhD students, undergraduates, and the third is online newspaper fact checkers. And he watches, he assesses all 3 of those groups, not just doing the assessment, but he does these kind of think alouds. How are they actually watching how they find information? And the online fact checkers are able to make sense of the fact checkers are able to make sense of the online information much better than either the other 2 groups. And they do it by looking for, if you see an information on the web, you find out from the web information on that source. So if the source is environmentsolutions.com, you don't start with that website to look at the information. You start by looking at what other people are saying about that website so that you can position that website and understand whether or not it's supported by the fossil fuel industry, even though it says environmentalsolutions.org, or from a citizens group. And so, again, they have very different methods of kind of how they make sense of online information. But his basic takeaway is undergraduates and citizens in general don't know how to do this work very well. Was that helpful?
Right, I mean, I'm just curious what, again, I'm thinking about what's the goal? Like, is there a goal, like we want, 80% of incoming freshmen to improve by this many percentage points by the time they're juniors? Or is it, we want to create an ever more knowledgeable society, so we're starting at a baseline of society is only at 20%, and we want to move the needle 5%.
Yeah, so the way I think about it is not just in society in general, or the institution in general relative to society. I think about kind of where are places in the institution that you can work on to improve. Where are there challenges in the institution that you can identify with data-driven measures to improve performance. And I think of improvement as continuous improvement, that you're never satisfied. You want to continuously drive improvement with this kind of measurement. But you'd want to see kind of improvement from all students, and then kind of monitor very carefully where different tracks, different educational experiences at an institution were leading to those positive outcomes or not.
I guess I'm thinking of a sort of cause and effect. You're looking really deeply at the student experience, and will you be able to for those students that experience success in various ways, you think you can really measure the quality of various individual university services?
Yeah, I think that you can try and disentangle some of those things.
Because you've got a large enough group.
And sophisticated enough measurement. Again, though, it depends it depends exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But, again, if we, during the talk I mentioned, if students are doing more group work in a certain place,
Yes.
and their T1 to T2 change on the collaborative problem-solving task tracks with that, one can be pretty confident that that was the mechanism that led to it. That you can't, there's always all sorts of,
Well, I'm always worried about all the other
yeah,
influences.
this kind of study is not experimentally kind of introducing, assigning people randomly to the group project or no group project to definitively identify that. Someone should do that work, but that's not what this is. That's not the design of this project. What this project can do is, once you set up the measurement system, there are kind of random experiments occurring at UCI and any university, just by the nature of the institution running it. So you have the opportunity, once you have the measurement system in place, to then be able to kind of take advantage of kind of quasi-experimental study, create quasi-experimental studies that the data provides a backdrop for.
Okay.
Okay, I'll take the last question, and then we'll close. It's 5:30.
Sorry, so I'm wondering what involvement your student affairs professionals on campus have had in this project, and if not much, then if you have any plans on, I don't know, maybe collaborating with them?
Yeah.
Because I saw you said leadership, faculty, and students, which is great,
Yeah.
but I'm also looking at some of the like performance assessments and the core survey areas that you touched on, and a lot of those things are things that student affairs professionals are like skills they're targeting at improving for students.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we have already involved them, but I think there's opportunities for deeper collaboration moving forward. And so, we very much aspire to deepening that collaboration. And I've also had meetings with the academic advising national group. I'm trying to remember what the.
NACAC.
Yeah, exactly. Because I do think that they're really a key lever for kind of producing change in this space. And and again, we've been in dialogue with them, but that work needs to be deepened, and I think will be deepened once we kind of start showing kind of what's capable, what's possible, and then how we can kind of iterate and refine the measurement moving forward.
Yeah, I would be curious to know what I think you call it the cross-cultural center at UCI. I would be curious to know like what their staff would look at this and tell you.
Yeah,
And think about it.
Well, and also the Office of Diversity and Inclusion on campus, who Doug Haynes directs, and he's on the advisory board for the project. So again, we're trying to go out of our way to kind of make this useful to units on campus that are explicitly focused on improving student outcomes, because those are the most likely people to make use of this information and improve institutional performance. Thank you very much again for coming out.